So, what happens when one of the biggest retailers in the world decides to sue the President of the United States? Well, you get a high stakes legal battle with billions of dollars on the line. And at the very heart of it all is a huge question: who really has the power to tax? That's exactly what we're diving into. And 1929 all over again, a Great Depression. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic warning from the president, right? And it really sets the stage for this whole story. It connects a big box store we all know to a fundamental question of constitutional power that's now landed in front of the Supreme Court. So, how did we get to this point? Well, our story really kicks off with a very familiar name deciding to take on the US government in a massive way. It all started on November 28th. That's when Costco Wholesale filed a lawsuit. And their demand is actually pretty simple. They argue that the tariffs the administration imposed are illegal. And, well, they want a full refund of every single dollar they paid, with interest, of course. And here's the thing, it's not just Costco. Not by a long shot. Dozens of other major companies. We're talking Bumblebee Foods, Revlon, Kawasaki Motors, Yokohama Tire, you name it. They've all filed pretty much identical lawsuits. So this has ballooned from just one complaint into this huge, coordinated corporate challenge to presidential power. Okay, so why are all these companies suing? What makes them so sure that these tariffs are illegal? Well, it all comes down to the specific law the president used to justify them in the first place. The whole legal case hinges on something called IEEPA. That's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act from back in 1977. Now, this is a law that gives the president some pretty sweeping powers to regulate international commerce. But, and this is key, it's supposed to be for a declared national emergency, to respond to extraordinary foreign threats. And this brings us to the absolute core of the legal fight. IEPA gives the president the power to regulate importation. But does the word regulate automatically include the power to tax? The lower courts have actually already looked at this, and they've ruled that no, regulating something is different from taxing it, and that the power to tax is something the Constitution explicitly gives to Congress. So, with those lower courts already weighing in, this fundamental showdown over the separation of powers has now climbed all the way up the ladder to the U.S. Supreme Court. So the two sides are making classic constitutional arguments here. On one hand, you've got the administration. They're saying, look, the power to regulate imports is incredibly broad, especially during a national emergency. Their logic is, since IEEPA lets them ban imports entirely, a less extreme action like a tariff should obviously be allowed. But Costco and the others are making a totally different case. They're pointing to the Constitution and saying, hold on a minute, the power to tax is separate from the power to regulate. They argue that if Congress wanted to give the president the power to just create new taxes out of thin air, it would have had to say so clearly and explicitly. A fuzzy word like regulate just isn't a blank check. Now, this might sound like an abstract legal debate, but it has very, very real-world consequences. We're talking consequences measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. So, if the Supreme Court actually sides with Costco and says these tariffs are illegal, the U.S. government could be looking at a massive bill. Economists estimate the total refund owed to all these companies could hit $130 billion by the end of the year. Now, $130 billion is a staggering number, no doubt, but let's put it into perspective. The entire U.S. economy is about $30.5 trillion a year. That means this refund, as huge as it is, represents less than 0.5% of the total economy. So while it would definitely be a major financial hit, most economists are saying it's pretty unlikely to cause a 1929-style Great Depression all on its own. The White House, however, sees it very differently. A spokesman came out and said that the economic consequences of not upholding these tariffs would be enormous. So they're framing this as not just a legal squabble, but as a direct threat to the country's financial stability. So let's play this out. What if the Supreme Court rules against the administration? Does that just mean the whole tariff war is over? Not so fast. The president has a plan B, or maybe a few of them. There are several other tools in the presidential toolkit. For example, there's Section 122, which lets the president impose fast, temporary tariffs to deal with a trade deficit. Then there's the more powerful Section 232, which allows for tariffs based on national security, but it requires a formal investigation first. And then you've got the real wild card, Section 338. It's an old, untested law that allows for big, retaliatory tariffs against unreasonable trade practices, which you can bet would probably just spark a whole new round of legal challenges. So in the end, this whole case, kicked off by a lawsuit from a warehouse store, is about so much more than just the price of stuff we buy. It's really a defining moment that could redraw the lines of power between Congress and the president for years to come. The real question the Supreme Court is answering isn't just about tariffs. It's about who fundamentally gets to call the shots on the economic direction of the country.